Today, 2 Fulerton police officers accused of the brutal beating of a homeless man will be back in court today for day 2 of their preliminary hearing. Doug Kolk is at the courthouse in Santa Ana this morning. Doug.
Well, good morning, Michaela. And any moment now, that preliminary hearing is expected to resume. And when it's all said and done, a judge is going to have to make the decision, does this case go to trial? Now, key evidence was presented yesterday in the form of a 33-minute surveillance video that was extremely graphic. And before we show you that, we must warn you, the images could be considered disturbing. Well, that was just a portion of the video that played in the Orange County courtroom on Monday. It shows the fatal beating of 37-year-old Kelly Thomas. Now, in the video, you can see officers Manuel Ramos and Cicinelli delivering blow after blow, using fists, batons, even tasers. It happened on July 5th outside a Fulerton bus depot. Officers Ramos and Cicinelli were responding to reports of a homeless man breaking into cars. Thomas himself was homeless and suffered from schizophrenia. Officers say they did what they had to do to restrain him. The defense is arguing that his death was caused at the hospital and not at the hands of the officers. Monday, Thomas's father sat through the painstaking process of watching his son's beating in court.
He's running for his life. And he's begging for forgiveness, begging for God, and forever he was calling for me to come and help him, to save him. And then his calls for me and help were further apart and more faint, further apart and more faint as he's calling Dad. You know, it just kills me, just crushes me to hear that. And he died calling for me.
Now, Ramos faces a second-degree murder charge, which carries a maximum life sentence in jail. Cicinelli, involuntary manslaughter, up to 4 years in prison. Now, of course, KTLA will be inside that courtroom once the preliminary hearing resumes, and we will deliver you the latest throughout the day. For now, back to you.
All right, Doug Holt reporting there. Thanks very much.
2 police officers accused in the fatal beating of Kelly Thomas are back in court today for day 2 of the preliminary hearing. Their defense team blaming doctors for Thomas's death. Good afternoon. This is the KTLA 5 News at 1. I'm Glenn Walker.
And I'm Leila Feinstein. David Begnaud has been watching this case very closely. He joins us live now from the courthouse with the latest on today's hearing. David.
Leila, this was quite a jaw-dropper for Kelly Thomas's family. The defense seeming to raise the issue today that maybe doctors messed up. Maybe the paramedics who treated Kelly didn't quite treat him right, and so maybe it's their fault he died. Even at one point suggesting maybe Kelly Thomas had an anxiety attack. Maybe it was something with his body. It wasn't the officers, their weight, their punches, their fists, their knees that killed Kelly. Maybe he just had a heart attack. To the video now, we showed it to you yesterday. It is circulating around the country, garnering national attention. And today it was replayed in court once again this morning as the physician who treated Kelly at UCI talked about how he believes, based on this video, he thinks it's the pressure of the officers with their knees and their fists and their body weight on top of Kelly that literally, if you will, sucked the air out of Kelly. The doctor at one point saying in the hearing today, there is a point in the video at which you can hear Kelly's voice start to die off. The doctor is saying it's almost as if he's losing oxygen and then he passes out. But again, the most startling issue raised today is the defense suggesting that maybe the medical team made a mistake, and that is what resulted in Kelly's death. Here now, the Kelly Thomas attorney answering that allegation.
They want to go in there and cross-examine these healthcare providers and suggest that maybe they did something wrong because they didn't provide the right kind of intubation or the right kind of CPR. The reality is, it's the beating on the face of Kelly Thomas. It's the breaking of his bones on his face, his nose, the ethmoid process, the zygomatic process that caused profuse bleeding that went into his lungs. And when they kept him on his back as long as they did, and he couldn't turn sideways to spit out that blood, and that's what deprived his brain of the oxygen, and that's what killed his brain. That's what killed him on the spot.
That was Garo Martirosyan, who is the attorney for Ron Thomas, Kelly's father. Ron has been in court all day today, appearing quite emotional, frustrated, listening to the defense seeming to suggest that it was maybe a heart-related issue that led to Kelly's death and not something that the officers did. We thought the hearing was going to wrap up today. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. We're expecting the autopsy photos to be shown this afternoon. More testimony from the pathologist, the coroner, who also saw Kelly's remains, and we're told this could go into tomorrow, will likely go in tomorrow, before a judge decides whether or not the two officers, the two Fulerton officers charged in this case, will face a trial. We'll have more coming up tonight at 6 o'clock. For now, we are live in Santa Ana. I'm David Begnaud, KTLA 5 News.
Elsewhere tonight, two police officers accused in the fatal beating of Kelly Thomas were back in court for day 2 of their preliminary hearing. The officers' defense team today blaming doctors for Thomas's death.
Well, David Begnaud has been watching this case very closely. He joins us live now from the courthouse in Santa Ana with the latest on today's hearing. David?
Cher, those defense attorneys raised some interesting theories, saying maybe firefighters were negligent in how they treated Kelly, and that's why he died. Maybe doctors were negligent. Maybe the pathologist diagnosed Kelly and just decided they had the wrong cause of death. Maybe they were wrong. Kelly Thomas's father said every one of those scenarios was ridiculous. Tonight, we're going to show you the autopsy photos, not to be graphic, not to be salacious, but because I want you to see exactly what the evidence is in this case. It's important to remember, this hearing is not to determine guilt or innocence. This hearing is to decide if there's enough evidence to take these two officers to trial. This was Kelly Thomas's body the day after he died last July. Autopsy photos entered into evidence today show that Kelly had bruises over much of his body. The pathologist who performed the autopsy testified in court today. The bruises to Kelly's chest and his arms caused shock, but it was the trauma to his face and the pressure from 6 police officers on top of him that killed him. He couldn't breathe, and he kept yelling that.
Dude, I can't breathe, man. Please, I can't breathe. Okay. I can't breathe, man. Put your hands on your back.
If his blood-curdling screams aren't enough to suggest he was in pain, there was a pool of blood on the ground after it happened. 2 of the officers are now charged criminally, Manuel Ramos and Cicinelli. Today, Ramos's attorney, John Barnett, suggested Kelly may have died from natural causes. That's because on the day of the autopsy, the pathologist initially wrote in a report Kelly had an enlarged heart. In fact, the supervisor at the coroner's office, who is not a doctor, documented that there was cardiac pathology to support a natural death. But that was before anyone had a chance to see the video and read the papers from the hospital to fully understand what happened. The other attorney, Michael Schwartz, who represents Officer Cicinelli, raised the possibility that maybe it was fluid injected into Kelly's body at the hospital that caused all the bruising. But the pathologist insisted Kelly died from the pressure of those 6 officers on his chest for nearly 20 minutes and the brutal beating he took to his face. Ron Thomas walked out of the courtroom today. The autopsy photos just seemed to be too much for him. He has been in there for everything, but that seemed to be the breaking point. We'll be back in court tomorrow. The pathologist set to take the stand tomorrow morning. We could get a decision as early as midday tomorrow as to whether or not these 2 Fulerton police officers will, in fact, face trial. We'll be there and have reaction and coverage live. We're live tonight in Santa Ana. I'm David Begnaud, KTLA 5 News.
Courtroom shocker today as the defense team for 2 Fulerton police officers accused in the beating death of Kelly Thomas suggested he may have died from natural causes. Our David Begnaud has been in court for both days of the hearing. He's with us now from the KTLA newsroom. David.
Micah, the trauma surgeon who treated Kelly the night he arrived at UCI Trauma Hospital said that initially he died likely from a lack of oxygen to the brain. But one of the defense attorneys today really drove home the point, suggesting that maybe the doctor was wrong in his care. So he asked the doctor, he said, "Doc, I want you to point out exactly where in the video it was that you believe Kelly lost oxygen and could no longer breathe, could no longer scream." So here it is. It's quite long, but I want you to see it. It was right there in the video that UCI trauma surgeon Dr. Michael Lakawa says Kelly Thomas lost his ability to breathe and therefore continued to scream for help.
His ability to speak diminished over time until he went silent. So that was as a result of not being able to breathe.
Defense attorney John Barnett, who represents accused officer Manuel Ramos, didn't seem convinced. All day he pushed the theory maybe emergency care for Kelly was inadequate, and that's why he died. Even at one point grilling the woman who performed the autopsy on Kelly's body. She said Thomas died because of injuries to his face, and the pressure of those officers on his chest, she said, was just too much for Kelly to withstand. But Barnett wasn't quite buying it.
But is that true that he couldn't breathe after his chest had been compressed?
Even before the pathologist could say yes, the prosecutor objected to the way Mr. Barnett was questioning, and the judge pulled all the attorneys into his chambers and then declared a recess.
Part of the reason the judge declared the recess is the audience reacted at Barnett's questioning. That seemed to annoy the judge. He reminded the audience again, look, I know this is a tough case. The images are tough. The video is tough. But I need you to keep it under control because this is a court proceeding. Once again, to determine if there is enough evidence to put the two officers arrested on trial, that decision could come as early as midday tomorrow. We'll be back in the courtroom. For now, we're live in the newsroom. I'm David Begnaud, KTLA 5 News.